Annenberg Media.
With additional support from Equicor Equitable HCA Corporation, the Good Listening Employee Benefits Company.
We do not all start life on an even playing field. But the rules are that we all play it by the rules of honesty and ethics.
Before I took that case, I had to agree that I would do anything ethical to defend that man.
So I'm going to just do the best I can. Is it imperfect? You bet. Is it awful? Well, maybe so.
Isn't there a point in a civilized society where one man has to be willing to step outside the system and say, no, I cannot do this because it's wrong?
I think we're at that point, which is nice in the sense, ethically, where we don't have the rules to protect us. We have to agonize with ourselves and our conscience.
Suddenly, the headlines in the newspaper and on television and radio trumpet the tragedy of a young woman killed in a violent crime. The woman's father, distraught, speaks words of grief and vengeance. It's all there. The neighbors describing the victim, the police reporting the crime. Soon there will be lawyers, a trial, sentencing, perhaps. That story is there in one form or another every day in almost every American city. Defense lawyers, prosecutors, judges, jurors, families, all have their roles to play. Sometimes these roles demand extraordinary steps that seem to be outside our commonly held concept of ethical conduct. A guilty person is protected by the attorney-client privilege. Often the victim's reputation may be smeared. In the end, a convicted felon may get a sentence that outrages the sense of justice of the community. Now, we ask you to imagine that a sensational crime story has just moved over the wire services. Initial reports indicate that the slashed body of a prominent young stock trader, one Wendy Wright, has just been discovered in her apartment in a fashionable neighborhood. Our moderator, Professor Charles Ogletree, plays the part of John Barnes, an advertising executive and the former lover of the slain woman. We begin as Barnes seeks the counsel of his minister.
Reverend Shriver, I'm John Barnes. I'd like to talk to you if I could. A terrible thing happened this past weekend. I killed Wendy. Will you forgive me?
I'm not sure that I am the person who could be capable of forgiving you or has the right to forgive you.
Well, I can cope with it a lot better if you tell me that you'll forgive me, that you'll help me work this out. That's what I need.
I will work with you, yes, and even if I have to accompany you to the electric chair, I'll be there at that moment.
Are we talking about that now? Is this a little premature?
Well, first of all, I must encourage you and ask you to turn yourself in.
Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that now.
Well, then that's our first disagreement.
Well, will you, let me stay here in the church tonight. If I can do that, to give me some time to think about it. Can I have shelter in the church?
Ancient right of sanctuary, yes, I will certainly grant you that.
Okay. And you don't mind that I'm not going to say anything right away, but we'll talk about this later.
Well, I mind a great deal whether you say anything sooner rather than later to the appropriate authorities, because you have committed a crime against us all to some extent. Every murderer does that.
Wait, but I'm coming to you for forgiveness.
You have to reckon with a crime that you have committed, and in that reckoning, God and some of your neighbors will be with you. But at no point in the midst of all of that is any of us going to forget that you have committed an important crime.
Well, are you going to turn me in?
No, I'm not going to turn you in.
Professor Gillers, is Reverend Shriver's approach to me and his concern about my forgiveness and possibly confessing, is that the moral thing for him to do?
That's up to his conscience. It's, in my world, it's not the moral thing to do, but it's a different morality.
Why not?
In my world, the moral thing for him to do, were he a defense lawyer, is to get you the best possible deal he can. And if that's a walk, it's a walk. I'm not out to save your soul. I'm out to save your time or your life.
How about that, Reverend Shriver?
Judgment against your deed is something that has to be talked about and reckoned with as a part of the forgiveness process, if I may use that phrase, but never in any of the documents that I would swear by, like the Bible, that many attorneys have their witnesses swear by the way. None of those documents suggest that you can be forgiven for something that you haven't confessed, engaged in a process of repentance to maybe to do restitution for.
Well, isn't a confession the first step
and endured some punishment. Yes, isn't what?
Punishment. Wait a minute. Isn't my confession to you the first step in
There is some
repentance?
punishment in that. I mean, you're beginning a certain repentance process. But one thing we must avoid in all this forgiveness business is cheap forgiveness.
You think this is cheap forgiveness?
I think cheap forgiveness that thinks you can thereby avoid the processes of changing your orientation, changing your mind, doing some restitution, and enduring some punishment. If you forfeit that or try to bypass or dilute it, you are asking for cheap forgiveness.
Ms. Sims, based on what you've heard about this case, is this an interesting case for the prosecution?
At this point, we don't have any evidence, and I'm certainly hoping we'll have some soon. Yes, it is interesting. The death of anyone is important. If Reverend Shriver is still in the scenario, it's going to be terribly important whether or not I get his testimony. That's going to be a hot issue.
Wait. What do you mean? I've talked to this man in confidence, and I've confessed to him. You're going to try to get testimony from Reverend Shriver?
Yes, sir.
Why?
Because at this stage, that's the only evidence I have of your having killed Wendy. And I'm going to certainly try very hard to do that.
Reverend Shriver? That's not going to happen, is it?
I'm going to resist that.
To the death, right?
I'll take a pass on that one.
You will not reveal my confidences?
No, I will not.
Under the threat of contempt, under the threat of imprisonment?
Oh, yes. But don't ask me how long.
Ms. Sims, how would you prosecute this case? I mean, you've heard a little bit about Wendy Wright and her background, successful woman, and you've heard a little bit about Johnny Barnes.
I have to decide whether I'm going to handle it as if it is a typical homicide so that I don't get too excited about it and too overzealous, or whether or not I'm going to get on the verge of hysteria because of the personalities involved. I'm going to try to handle it as coolly and as calmly and as typically as I would any other homicide.
Okay. Mr. Harshberger, let me ask you, assume I'm a young new prosecutor in your office and I've been assigned this case. You've tried a lot of these cases and I admire you. You milk the media and you get conviction after conviction. So the first thing I want to know, can we issue a press release on this case talking about Johnny Barnes and call this some kind of preppy murder or high society murder or something like that?
Well, I'm not going to assign a young prosecutor this case.
Assuming he's assigned.
Yeah, he would not handle the media.
His question is judgment.
Yes.
That is, does he respond to media inquiries about?
He would not. Our office would. Our office would respond.
I knew it. So you'll be on camera, and I won't. I knew it. There is always interest.
Not me.
You issue the press release. You'll make the statement. You'll say, I'm here to defend the community's rights. We're here to make sure that this case is fairly prosecuted.
That's right. Exactly.
Why can't I say that? I'm going to try the case. Why are you getting all the coverage?
It's very important as a matter of professional responsibility for me to control, to the extent what is said at this point in the case regarding this matter, because of the very tricky balance between the public's right to know, but also the rights of the defendant here to have a fair trial in this process, and that's part of my responsibility. But when you have this kind of focus, you have a professional person as the defendant in the case, arguably. You have a person who's a professional person as the victim. The focus, I think, is going to come partly from the system, but mostly from the fact that this is going to get public attention. it's not because we don't pay any attention to it in the system. It's because the media will focus on this, because this is now this will sell newspapers. It doesn't sell newspapers if a homeless person is murdered. This is going to be a high society professionals case, and the media is going to play it, and they are going to act as if it deserves more focus than the other case.
The information that the press receives is not necessarily information that they're going to receive from investigative reporting. It is normally going to come from law enforcement and the district attorney's offices, so that the information that is being used or utilized by the media is going to usually, in most of the instances, come from law enforcement, is going to come from district attorney's offices. Whether or not Scott is going to leak that himself or one of his assistants is certainly going to come out of that office or out of the police department. So I don't think it is a matter of saying that the media is the cause of this.
Ms. Quinlan, is this an important media case?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's not what people expect. The murder of a stock trader by an advertising man shortly after their engagement is broken off is out of the ordinary in terms of people's experience. And there's also sort of a broad category of stories that we've come to realize readers like that come under the heading of lovers' quarrels. And this is the ultimate lovers' quarrel.
You're going to give this case more attention because it involves a high society couple?
It's going to be my perception that the readers are going to be interested in reading about it.
How do you reach that perception?
By seeing whether we sell papers, by seeing what people turn to on the news, by hearing what people talk about in the streets.
You will make a judgment about Wendy Wright's life based on how many newspapers you sell?
No, I wouldn't make a judgment about Wendy Wright's life. I'd make a judgment about this story in general.
And that's what's important. How many papers will be sold?
It's not the only thing that's important, but I certainly think it's important to know what the readership considers news and to balance it with what you consider news.
I think what makes this an attractive case, politically and in the press, is not so much the identity of the victim as the identity of the murderer. It is unusual for someone that affluent in that class to be in this kind of trouble. You know, it's why the Greeks wrote their plays about kings and not Joe Dokes on the street. That's what makes it interesting. There's something terrible about the downfall of a king, more so than about the downfall of a beggar.
Dr. Gale, let me ask you, if you had been approached by John Barnes that morning and he was a prior patient of yours, would you feel any different about his request that you not reveal this murder?
I would feel different. John, I have to tell you, it's painful for me to turn you in. It violates a professional code, which I take very seriously. But I have to tell you a lot of things. And the psychiatrist is not the first person I am. I'm a citizen of the country. I'm a human being who has a moral code. And I have a kind of hierarchy of those things. I honor my profession. But if I were a psychiatrist in the Nazis and I were asked to do some of the things, or a doctor in there, I am told by law, by Professor Giller's law, that as a soldier, I was culpable under the Nuremberg trials. But you're now in a moral dilemma. Professor Giller's doesn't have.
You're in a dilemma.
Yes, I'm in a moral dilemma.
And what are you going to do?
I'm going to consider the moral dilemma, which means, and I define a moral dilemma as a situation of anguish, where good and bad are done, either things they do. And considering the nature of your crime, I am going to, if I cannot convince you, and I will try hard, I've convinced you to do a lot of things, to give up a lot of your nasty habits, and you've done them. We don't have that kind of time now. But I am going to turn you in if I cannot convince you to turn in. Now, you can take comfort in the fact that it's going to cause me a lot of pain. And sleepless nights.
It's going to cause me a lot of pain.
Yes, yes. And the pain you experience may be the first step in the expiation that your Reverend has told you he wants from you.
Professor Gillers?
I have some very good advice for you, John. Right now, your most immediate problem is a legal problem. That's right. You ought to get yourself a defense lawyer. Right. You go to Will Galen, and he anguishes, and he intellectualizes, and then he becomes an informant against you. Stay away from the hereafter. Stay away from the people who are going to help your mind. Get yourself a good defense lawyer before you do anything else.
Well, Mr. Lippman, are you interested in my case?
I might be. Let's talk about it a bit. When did you meet Miss Wright?
About 3 years ago.
You loved her?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about her.
She's a wonderful woman. The only problem is that we have our differences. She is very aggressive sexually, and I'm repressed. And sometimes she teases me. We would have, you know, she's flirtatious. We'd go out, she'd flirt with other people. And she seemed to belittle me a lot.
You ever talk to her about this problem?
Yes, I did.
You ever talk to any professional people about this problem?
I did. I'm still paying some substantial bills. Some professional people.
To a shrink?
Yes.
They're not terribly helpful, are they?
They're terribly expensive.
They're terribly expensive. So are we, by the way. Tell me what's happened with the relationship these last several months now.
Well, it just went sour. For no reason that I know of, she just decided to break the relationship off.
When did the relationship get broken off?
In the last, about 6 weeks.
Really? What you been doing with yourself these last 6 weeks?
I've been thinking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about her, thinking about what I thought we were going to have.
Obsessing about
Trying to understand how this relationship that seemed so good, her parents were excited, my parents were excited, all our friends thought we were a wonderful couple. And then she just kind of tossed me aside, like a nothing.
Were you calling her every day?
I was calling her frequently, but not every day. I mean, I'd call her and try to talk to her. She'd hang up on me. I'd send her notes. I'd write her letters.
You send it to home, to her business?
To her. I'd send flowers to her office. I'd send flowers to her home. I'd leave her notes. I'd leave messages on her answering service.
Hey, what happened these last several days now?
I saw her at a party, and I was upset and said, perhaps we should try to work this thing out, that we should talk. And she just blew off. She said, get away from me. You're ridiculous. Get out of here. I don't want to be bothered. And then about an hour or so after I was at home, she called me. And she said, you know, I wish you'd stop this. You've been following me around. You continue to harass me, and I want it to come to an end. And I just asked her, well, can we talk? Let's just talk and see if we can work this out, because we've talked before and worked things out. And she finally agreed. I went over, and we were talking, and I felt it. I mean, we were there again. And I embraced her, and she just rejected me. She started laughing and rejected me, as if I was a nothing. Well, I just went off. I don't know what happened, but all of it, the whole relationship just came back, and I just snapped. And I killed her.
What happened afterward? Do you remember what you did afterward?
I went to see Reverend Shriver.
Did you tell him that
Yes,
you had caused her death?
I didn't give him all the details. He was talking about the death penalty and execution, and so I left.
Do you know if anyone saw you go into her building or come out of the building?
No. I am the evidence.
You are the evidence?
Yes.
Okay. My advice right now is to, for you to make a decision to retain a lawyer, whether it be me or somebody else. And I'm going to advise you at this point literally not to do anything.
Reverend Shriver and Dr. Galen suggested I talk to the police and explain to them what happened.
Well, that's the last thing I would tell you to do.
No, but they won't explain exactly how it happened. I mean, there are circumstances that explain it.
Mm-hmm. There are circumstances, and at this point, it may not be to your advantage to do that. I would have to think a little bit more about the case.
But it's the truth. What are you talking about?
That causing a person's death is a terrible event, and it's a terrible tragedy. But between causing a person's death and being guilty of a crime, there is an enormous difference between those two. And we have to explore the circumstances as to what motivated you and why you did it, and why this came about in order to determine if it in fact is a crime, and if it is a crime, what crime it may be, and how we should go about defending it. So we have a lot of work to do, you and me, today, tomorrow, or whoever your lawyer is, before you make that decision to go to the authorities, because once you go to the authorities, you may not be able to get out of their clutches for a while.
Ms. Yashevsky, will you represent me?
I'd like to talk to you some more. What I'd like to know about is, after you left that apartment, Tell me about going home and what you felt like on the
I
way
felt
home.
bad. I felt terrible. I just killed the person that I loved. And I didn't understand why it happened. I couldn't understand it.
Well, I know you've spoken with Mr. Littman, and I presume all the information that you've given Mr. Littman. I'm not certain whether I'll represent you at this point.
Why not?
Well, I assume this will be a high publicity case. You understand that, do you not?
Yes.
You're a middle-class person in this society. That kind of case will be covered and people will be concerned about it. And I pick and choose the cases that I do.
And you're not going to represent me?
I might represent you. I'd like to think about it a little more.
What's your hesitation? Because I'm a man?
Not because you're a man. It's because of the way I might be used in the courtroom. The very fact that I am a woman standing up in the courtroom says something to the jury about what had happened in this case. I might decide to do it. I'm not certain. And I'm not certain I'm the right person for you. You see, the role of the defense lawyer is a very important one, and it's important that you can zealously and very zealously represent somebody. Once you're in that courtroom, no one is going to presume you innocent anymore. You have to realize that. That's a principle in the law, but what happens is when you go into that courtroom, everyone's going to look at you and say, aha, that man killed that woman. And you need somebody in there who's really going to be able to stand by your side and believe every second of the time that they're in there they're doing absolutely the right thing with their time.
Mr. Mason?
It's a tough one. The people who will be prosecuting you, and depending upon the resources that are going to be allocated, your case is going to be a high-profile case. They are going to use all of their resources. They're not going to have those conflicts. They are going to be trying to put you away for as long as possible. And so I think you need someone who is going to analyze the case, determine whether or not it's murder, it's manslaughter, whatever the situation is, and most importantly, to determine what type of defense that you have and that they will be able to develop with you. So I think it's a matter of that person, or that lawyer, determining whether or not they are comfortable with you, with your case, and with your defense.
Well, why is this an ethical question? I mean, we're discussing this as though it's an ethical question whether a lawyer doesn't want to represent this individual for whatever reason.
Why would she not want to represent
you? She might not want to represent you because you won't pay enough money. Is that unethical? If that isn't unethical, surely it's not unethical to refuse to represent you because she doesn't feel comfortable, because she thinks that that maybe she'll be harming the cause of womanhood or whatever else.
That's a good enough reason, Judge?
It seems to me if the fact that you can't pay $150,000 instead of $100 is a good enough reason, surely that is. I don't think we're into the area of an ethical obligation to take the case unless there's no other lawyer around who can take it. Then I think these questions begin to become relevant. But as far as I'm concerned, a good criminal lawyer can refuse to take a case for whatever reason the criminal lawyer wants. There certainly is no more mendacious reason than money, and that's perfectly permissible.
Well, what if Mr. Yarashevsky does not want to represent me because I'm charged with rape?
I think she's fully entitled to do that, so long as there are other lawyers available who will take up your cause. As I say, it's a tough problem. She's the only lawyer in town, and
she's it.
An individual charged with rape needs a lawyer. Yeah, then I think she has an ethical problem. But I didn't know. I mean, these lawyers were all breaking their legs to get into this case.
Well, it seems to me that she's doing you a service by recognizing that she has her own personal conflicts and that perhaps she cannot make the best defense for you in your behalf, and that you need that. You're entitled to that.
Mr. Neal, think I could interest you and be my counsel in this case?
John, you've already gotten my attention. I understand you're a man of some means.
Absolutely.
See what I tell you?
We resolved the ethical dilemma.
Now that you're in my office,
He's worried about me selling newspapers.
Now that you're in my office, John, I don't want you to tell me anything. I want to tell you something. I am bound by a code of professional responsibility, and there are certain things I can and cannot do. For example, if you tell me that you stabbed Wendy, I can't put you on the stand and have you deny that you stabbed Wendy. Do you understand?
I understand.
Now,
you're telling me this before I tell you what happened.
I want to talk to you first about these things.
You don't want to know?
Not now. Now, John, if you tell me you didn't stab Wendy, and certainly you think you're the only evidence, they'll not find the knife, no one saw you coming in and out of the apartment, I want you to think about these things, and then, after you thought about them, we will talk about what your defense might be. Do you understand?
I do.
And I don't want you to go around talking to any more preachers or psychiatrists, too.
Okay.
There are very few deaf and dumb people in the penitentiary. Okay. Always remember that.
Okay.
Now, I'll think about your case, John. You go on.
Okay. Professor Gills, let me ask you, I hear this interesting legal discussion about judgments that lawyers are making.
The defense lawyers have maximum autonomy until they're retained. If they don't like the case and they're not the last lawyer in town, an interesting problem, they could walk away from it. Once they take the case, their autonomy is out the window. Then they know only one person in the world, and that person is their client. And regardless of how repulsive the case might be to them as human beings, as lawyers, they have to be loyal to a infinite degree.
How do you do that? I mean, that's an incredible burden to place on a lawyer.
It is an incredible burden. And I think, frankly, and you can ask Jack and Ellen and Jim, I think over a lifetime, it takes a real psychic toll. You can say, I'm doing the right thing, this is the job I was signed, I'm following the rules laid down, let them call me names, I don't care. But over a lifetime, when you're sitting in your living room, in your easy chair, it takes a psychic toll because they get mixed signals between their responsibility as professionals and their responsibility as human beings. Dr. Galen reconciles those mixed signals by putting his human responsibility above what he perceives to be his professional responsibility, and he may be right for his profession, but he's not right for the defense lawyers.
But the way you're talking about this autonomy and the lawyer-client relationship in the adversary system, I have the impression that all things are permissible. Are there any boundaries? Now, I guess what I'm really concerned about, and this is in the law, is all permitted? And when one has this absolute obligation to defend the client, I'll put one last question. I think we, on the whole, tend to think that it's an intrinsic value that doctors should cure disease. Do we have the same sense that winning all the cases is an intrinsic value?
Mr. Lippman?
I don't know about winning all the cases as an intrinsic value, but it certainly is an intrinsic value to have the awesome power of government constantly checked by defense lawyers so that mere accusations don't inevitably turn into guilt. And I guess it all depends on whose ox is gored. And since all of us around this table feel that none of us will ever commit a crime, or none of our children ever will, when you're in that situation and when you're facing it and when your children are facing it, it's at that moment that you realize why you need a criminal defense lawyer. Everyone is presuming everyone is guilty. That is not the fact. Everyone is presuming that prosecutors do their job not only zealously, but properly and correctly, and that is certainly not a fact. Everyone presumes that judges are fair and impartial and wonderful to the rights of everyone. That is also not a fact. Everyone presumes that jurors come into court unhampered by what they read in the press, fair-minded and impartial, and that too is not a fact. You need a zealous criminal defense lawyer in order, as Brandeis said, in order to promote liberty, we need eternal vigilance. And I think that is the criminal defense lawyer that must stand up to government at every moment.
Well, I do have something I want to say to Mr. Lippman, if I can. I've selected you as my lawyer, but there are a couple of things that you should know. They're not necessarily relevant to this case, I don't think, but you asked me to tell you everything, and I've told you as much as I can remember about the murder.
Don't keep calling it that.
The killing.
Go ahead.
The death. About 2 years ago, I was involved in another case. It was a similar case of a young woman who, as a result of a dispute, I killed her. And I'm not just sure what I should do about it, but I wanted to tell you, to let you have as much information as possible. I assume that also is protected by the attorney-client privilege?
Absolutely.
There's no way you're going to tell the police about it?
Unless we ever determine, and I don't quite see it at the moment, although it may depend on a variety of things that we uncover when we investigate the best way to defend your case, to bring that to light. But I don't quite see that, and until and unless I determine that, then we will never bring that to light. Certainly I won't.
Okay. Ms. Watson, does that trouble you? And if you knew that John Barnes killed Wendy Wright, and he came to you as a friend to try to explain it, you would feel trouble trying to withhold that information.
I would feel very troubled, and I'd find it very difficult to suggest that we have a killing and yet not a crime. I mean, that's very strange to me in the ethical framework of our societal values. And I would feel very much driven to persuade this gentleman to go to law enforcement officials to confront the results and the acts that he has committed.
Professor Gillers,
lawyers, especially criminal defense lawyers, are amoral agents who can justify their behavior only by being part of an adversary system that is based largely in the Constitution and that is moral. Now, we could change it. It's not that Jack and Ellen are arrogating to themselves a certain prerogative that no one else can. They're told to behave that way. Jack squeals, we disbar him. We disbar him. You and I in society disbar him.
Mr. Neal, I'm taking that fact away about killing a woman in similar circumstance. But I do have a problem that I want to tell you now that you've agreed to represent me, and I assume everything I say is in confidence.
Yes. Well, I might point out that if you tell me that
future,
you're going to...
I'm not, nothing in the future. Right. This is past. This is something I just want to get off my chest that happened a few years ago. I was involved in a robbery and a holdup, and during the robbery, a young man was killed. The police, through some screw-up, arrested the wrong person. And that person, I've been following his case. And I know that he's filed some appeals, and those appeals have been unsuccessful. He's been convicted. And in fact, he's scheduled to be executed.
Well, he probably did something else wrong anyway.
Yeah, some point.
He probably should have went. John, that's a very... Truth of the matter is you put a very difficult thing on me. One thing I wanted to point out here is society, as the professor says over there, society has made the judgment that we can't divulge a confidential communication once it's decided. Not only would we be disbarred, but in most states, it is a felony for a lawyer to violate the attorney-client privilege. Now, I will not tell about that fellow unless I conclude, this fellow that's going to prison or being executed, unless I conclude that this is an ongoing fraud on the court, which would be an exception to the attorney-client privilege, sometimes called the crime-fraud exception.
I understand that. I understand that. I want to know, I just told you that a man who did not commit a crime is scheduled to be executed.
Yes.
And I'm responsible for that crime.
Yes. John, I think maybe you ought to go see Reverend Shriver, but as for me, I have concluded that that is not an exception to the attorney-client relationship, and I must not divulge.
Why does it even come into... I thought he can't tell you anything at all and have it covered by the attorney-client relationship. Surely it has to be only information that's given you in order to enable you to defend him. Why does this information...
Everything about his past is necessary for me to provide a defense for him. Absolutely. No. Absolutely. Everything about him.
Is there any point at which a defense attorney is a person first and a defense attorney second? It doesn't seem there's ever that point.
Only as society has determined that he is violating the code of professional responsibility. Otherwise, my sole duty at that point in life is to stand beside the man accused of the crime, because believe me, you can be the most popular man in the world, but once you're accused of the crime, there is only one man or woman who will stand up with you, and that is your defense counsel. That's the only person in the world who tries to help you. Society does not. Your friends leave you, and that is my only goal while I'm defending that man, but I must do it within the code of professional responsibility, and that's where I look. If I'm not violating the code, before I took that case, I had to agree that I would do anything ethical to defend that man.
Including you will let an innocent man be executed.
I don't think so.
You will let an innocent man be executed just to protect the attorney-client relationship that you and I have.
Absolutely. If I concluded that, we have values to serve. The attorney, people die every day. This may sound harsh, But we have values.
It is harsh.
To serve.
It is harsh. It is harsh.
I want you to answer. People died for attorney-client privilege.
So you will allow an
Yeah.
innocent man to die to protect the attorney-client
I
relationship.
don't
An
think that's what
innocent
Jim is
man.
saying. Jim is not saying he's going to allow an innocent man to die. What he's going to say is he's not going to violate the attorney-client. There are ways of doing it. There are ways to bring it to the attention of the governor,
The
even
question I
of a
want him
prosecutor.
to answer is, are you going to tell Mr. Harshbarger
that told
my
me?
client told me that an innocent man is going to be executed?
I would not. Now, Jack
He's
is
going to tell me that he has information.
I might go to him. I probably would go to him and say, wait, don't execute that man. But I'd have to do it in a way that would not ever allow him to find that it came from you.
Are you going to be satisfied when he says an innocent man is being executed? Is that enough?
I believe that he has fulfilled his responsibility, but I believe it is my responsibility and responsibility of the government to prove these cases. I do not believe that the defense counsel has any responsibility whatsoever under our system to participate in any way in assisting government to stigmatize someone or take their liberty.
I understand that. I understand
right.
But what about the innocent man who will be killed because this lawyer didn't come forward?
Oh, I think he's got a terrible dilemma, but let me just make it, there's a big difference here. We're all sitting around saying, how can you do that ethically and not ethically? It's not an ethical question. The system has put in place, as Professor Gillers rightly said, we have made a judgment in this society that there's a certain way we're going to administer justice. The Constitution governs these particular issues. We can't be having every time a tough issue comes down, put it on each of these people and say, you're the bad people. That's shooting the messenger in this process.
Isn't it lawyers that made that rule, not society?
Yeah, not society.
It's
That's the
lawyers
Bar
that made
Association.
that rule for
right.
lawyers.
Other lawyers.
And the public and the legislature gets a chance to look at it, but basically nobody's paying any
That's right.
attention to lawyers who debate these at conventions and pass new rules about what lawyers can do and can't do, but it's only them who are doing it. It isn't society.
Isn't it our job collectively to begin to question the ethics of the system? The justice system may be unethical in certain aspects, as it was under when the Nazi judges found good Kantian reasons for going along with the racial laws. So aren't we free then to say, if the system somehow or other drives us into an unethical position, we are free in a democratic society to alter by legislation, litigation, discussion of ethics, the system?
Ms. Quinlan, please.
Dr. Galen says collectively, but also isn't there a point in a civilized society where one man has to be willing to step outside the system and say, no, I cannot do this because it's wrong? You talk about media reaction. I can tell you quite well what I think the media reaction would be if Mr. Neal stepped outside the system and said, I cannot let an innocent man be executed, because look at the reaction here. The society would say, damn right.
Oh, I'd be very popular, but I'd be wrong.
No, I don't think you would be wrong.
What you have said is that you would find some way to circumvent the system to get a word to the governor, and in fact what you are doing is violating your lawyer-client
No.
so doing.
I would have to try to do it. I might conclude I couldn't do anything without divulging the confidence, and that man would have to die as far as I'm concerned.
Over a code.
Over a law.
Over a law? That's, I mean, what, the law says that you can't give that information? There is a law that says that?
In Tennessee, it is a felony. I can be prosecuted for a felony for violating attorney-client
Well, it's time you litigated that by divulging the information. It's time we tested that. It's time you get yourself a lawyer and say, I'm divulging this. This man is not going to die, and let's litigate it, Mr. Neal. Get yourself, Mr. Mason, and you all walk through that courtroom and have every lawyer in Dade County and the state of Florida.
I believe in it. I think values are served far beyond a life by the attorney-client privilege. I do believe that. I would not litigate it. I believe it.
Mr. Lippman, you're going to represent John Barnes. Are you interested in some investigation that we've gathered from this case?
Not only what we have gathered, but what we better gather, yes.
Okay. Well, the investigator found some information for you. We were able to obtain an album of photographs showing the decedent posing nude on a number of occasions. We were able to locate a prior boyfriend who claims that he had a similar relationship where she seemed to tease a lot, be jealous, and that he's willing to testify about her attitude toward men in relationships. Does any of that information interest you?
Certainly some of it interests me.
Which part?
Certainly the part of the recent relationship she had with a boyfriend, because that may be very corroborative of your credibility in stating what happened in this case. And there are some states, under some conditions, in which that type of evidence is actually admissible to substantiate your story.
So how would you use it? What would you do?
Well, in any case which turns on an issue of why a person acted, which involves cases of psychiatric defenses, self-defense, and the like, it is important to note what is the reality that was going on at the time that the act occurred.
But wait, this is something that happened in the past with another guy. How do we know that that's relevant to John Barnes' case?
Well, we don't know if it's relevant until a judge rules that it makes an issue in your particular case more provable than not because we have this evidence. It may be very, very relevant to your defense and to your credibility and to substantiate your story, to show that the so-called victim has also a pattern of acting, which has replicated itself in this case to explain why you acted that way.
Ms.
So that may well be very, very relevant.
Information is relevant?
I don't think that it is relevant because whatever she may have done in the past does not mean that she should be killed for her past actions. Whether she has committed these activities that society considers to be undesirable or not, that does not mean that she should end up dead as a result.
No one is saying that it justifies her death, but what it will do is perhaps, under certain circumstances, substantiate your story. You may not, in fact, be totally exonerated as a result of that past conduct, but it may put some meat on the bones.
Ms. Quinlan, what do you think about that kind of evidence? The victim's past difficulties in relationship with another man?
Well, I'm not crazy about it, and I don't see, I'm not sure I see how it's relevant to the facts that John has spelled out. I don't see that her relationship with another man and the aggressive posture she took with him led to the incident with John.
And what's wrong with using it? I mean, what do you see that's morally wrong with Mr. Lippman using that information if it might persuade some jurors to reduce the charges against me or acquit me? What's morally wrong?
I would hope that wouldn't convince the jurors, but I think it's morally wrong to blame the victim. I think it's morally wrong to say you had your picture taken nude, ergo you deserve to die. And while Mr. Lippman would like to say that he doesn't make that cause and effect link, I think just by admitting that kind of evidence, he's implying it.
If you knew the information was available to you as a reporter, would you report it?
The nude pictures?
No, that this was the history of this victim. Would you report that as a reporter?
I probably would not.
You would not.
You'd be the only newspaper reporter in town who wouldn't,
Yeah, you'd be the only one that would.
I probably would
Is that
not.
a personal choice rather than a professional, ethical choice?
I think it's a combination of the two. I find it very difficult to neatly sort out my personal and professional choices.
But you'd print it, wouldn't you? You'd print it.
Well,
And if you told your editor.
I would. If I was working for a tabloid, I'd probably be pushed very hard to print it. If I was working for the sort of newspaper I do work for, I think that there'd probably be considerable more restraint on the point of my editors. I would be predisposed not to do it, and I think some of that has to do with being a woman.
But editors would print it. That would get printed in a newspaper. The question I have is, no one's talked about why is this evidence really relevant?
Judge Patel?
In this case, based upon what I've heard so far, I wouldn't find it's relevant. We're not concerned about the victim's intent here. We're concerned about the defendant's. And her prior conduct is really not relevant, based upon what I've heard so far, to his intent. Now, if I determine that, in fact, the evidence is relevant, I've got to weigh over its probative value, as the term is used, against its prejudicial value. And that is a value judgment that I have to make, sometimes with very little guidance in the law. And it is a dilemma, particularly when you know that a person who is not able to defend themselves because she's dead is going to have her past across the front pages of the newspaper as well as in the courtroom.
What if you were convinced that the evidence is legally relevant and you're compelled to admit it? How are you going to feel when you go home that night, and how
I'm going to be saddened by it as a person, but as a judge, I know I have to follow the law. And if I am satisfied that that is what the law requires that I do, then I have to do that.
Justice Scalia, you're bound by law to rule that this evidence is admissible. assuming that fact, that it's legally admissible evidence, can you explain to Ms. Waddleton why you're going to admit this evidence about these very private details of Wendy Wright's background?
I suppose if I accept your premise that that it is admissible, my explanation is simply that we have here a very serious matter, to wit, the freedom, and is this a state that has capital punishment? I don't know. Perhaps the life of an individual who's been accused of this murder. This evidence is relevant to establishing, if not a defense, at least a matter in mitigation of the seriousness of the crime. And however unfortunate it is that it may sully the reputation of the deceased, the deceased is deceased, and we're talking about the life of a live individual. That's the reason it's let in.
But to what extent do you go? Do you let in any information about her previous behavior and background? How far does that go? How much is the victim
Only if it's
probed?
relevant. Only if it's relevant to the defense.
Well, we have one final saga in this case. John Barnes goes to trial, and he's not convicted of murder, but of manslaughter, a lesser included offense. And in this jurisdiction, the maximum penalty is 20 years, and the minimum penalty is no time, probation. Judge Patel, the jury has convicted John Barnes. Are you ready to sentence him?
After I've got a very thorough report from a probation officer or someone who is assigned to develop all of the background information, after I've gotten sentencing memoranda from the government attorney and Mr. Barnes' attorney, and heard all of that, yes, then I will be.
Wait a minute. What does background have to do with whether you're going to impose a sentence of probation or some term of years?
We have to know what kind of a person we're looking at. Are we looking at a person who has prior criminal history?
Assume he has no prior record.
We need to know maybe some other circumstances that did not come out at the time of trial about, and also about this individual. How remorseful is he about what happened?
So you want as much information as you can possibly get?
Absolutely. I have very serious responsibility. I am now sentencing an individual, a human being, and making some significant decisions about his life for possibly the next 20 years. And I need to know as much about him, as much as the prosecutor feels and the defense attorney feels and anybody else who's interested.
So information, information, information to help make a decision. Mr. and Mrs. Wright, the parents, want to speak at sentencing. You want to hear from them?
Yes, I will.
And they want to tell you that the only rational sentence in their view is 20 years. And there's a victims' rights group that's concerned about women being abused in this community. You want to hear from them?
In some fashion.
The Organization for a Better Community comes forward, and they want to speak to you about John Barnes and about Wendy Wright, and they want you to impose a sentence of 20 years. What sentence are you going to impose?
No prior record?
No prior record.
We're probably looking at something like between 10 and 15 years.
Judge Duncan?
About the same. I think the fact that judges are so all over the map in this sort of a decision is why Congress and state legislatures all around the country have now started to say, we want to make you follow some guidelines. We want to tell you that for this crime, 8 years would be the middle term, and if you're not going to give him 8 years, then you better tell us in a long memo, Judge, why you're not going 8 years.
Dr. Galen?
It's an interesting thing. The courts have been so conditioned and brainwashed to looking for causes in the past that they seem to have forgotten, and they think of punishment as a form of deterrence, which I'm sure it's supposed to be, or to warn the public not to do the same, that they seem to have forgotten that the court, in all its majesty, with all its instruments, defense attorney, prosecuting attorney, jury, has decided that a crime was committed. That they forget that certain crimes demand certain punishments. They demand it. As Kant said, the last murderer should be punished. They demand it because the system operates with a sense that things work. We don't allow them, I'm not allowed to wreak my vengeance on my daughter's murderer. I'm protected by the fact that society will give a retributive punishment. independent of whether he was poor, he was rich, he was psychologically ill. My daughter is dead. That death demands it. I don't give a damn if Hitler would have ever repeated the crime again. I don't want him to go to Argentina with his paint and palette. He could have been a talent. I don't want to hear that he had great talents. My moral outrage demands that he be punished. I didn't pick the sentence. They did. The system worked. There's the sentence. There's all too much going into the sociology and the psychology without the recognition that there's an imperative to show people that things work.
Listening to the last few comments, especially Dr. Galen's, almost compels me to invoke Oliver Wendell Holmes, and I'll, with many apologies to him because I'm only going to paraphrase it, but hard cases like great cases make bad law. And cases are called hard not because of some intrinsic difficulty in the case, but because of some accident of immediate overwhelming interest which inflates and appeals to feelings and distorts the judgment. And as Holmes said, these interests have a sort of a hydraulic pressure, which makes things that once seemed so clear appear doubtful, and before which even settled principles of law will bend. We have a legislature that we as citizens have elected. They have enacted a law that said if you are convicted of the crime of manslaughter, for which John Barnes was convicted, you may get a sentence which at the low end may be no time at all, and at the upper end may be 20 years. And we don't have the Willard Galens of this world saying, I'm going to be the legislature, forget what's written in the law, and the only sentence should be 20 years. If the elected people that we as citizens elect have given that kind of power to judges, we expect this kind of discriminating, careful judgment.
Well, what about
certainly there should be uniformity, and certainly there should be fairness. But somewhere along that continuum, there have to be a variety of different sentences.
But I'm saying it may be that we ought not, that we've sold you that because we got into a whole rehabilitative kind of concept and a whole sociological kind of concept and a whole psychological kind of concept that could explain everything. Everybody is either poor, disaffected, a woman, a minority, or worse, rich, and therefore no rationale for doing it, so they must be crazy, or something like that. I am saying that it is time we began to place a greater emphasis on the retributive aspects and the recognition that taking a life may demand, with all the exculpations of everything else, a certain price. What the price is, I'm happy to let the legislatures determine.
There's one final end to this story. This conviction is reversed because the prosecutor improperly used the confession. Johnny Barnes on the step of the courthouse saying, the system of justice works. I admitted I was wrong, my rights were violated, the process protected me. As can be expected, Mrs. Wright and Mr. Wright are furious. They've lost their daughter. And Johnny Barnes is not only acquitted, he can never be prosecuted again. He's a free man. And lo and behold, Mrs. Wright kills Johnny Barnes. Justice Scalia, what are you going to...
I don't answer questions until two other levels of judges have first thought about
it. Every other judge has passed the buck to you.
All right.
She stands before you to be sentenced. What's going through your mind?
I suppose what would be going through my mind would be a certain sadness that the system should not only have succeeded in letting off someone who should have been punished, but appears to be about to succeed in punishing someone who should never have been driven to do what she did. Nonetheless, she did what she did, and I'd give her a sentence.
The question is, what sentence would you impose?
That's it. Give her at least 5 years.
Now,
Dr. Galen?
I will tell you that I would leave it to the wisdom of the jury, who acts with their heart rather than with their mind anyway, and I don't think she'd be convicted. I think it would be handled before it got to judgment. But if she were convicted, then my principle holds. I do not believe that she had a right to take another life, and my principle would hold.
Reverend Shriver?
I speak as a citizen as much as anything at the end of this panel to say that the legal system in these cases owes us two things. One, retribution for the crime, but you also owe us the moderation of our popular propensity for revenge and for disproportionate retribution. What this mother was doing was imposing capital punishment upon this man whom the judicial system had already said does not deserve capital punishment. You owe us retribution. What you also owe us is the moderation of our natural willingness to always take an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and maybe 2 eyes and 2 teeth while we are at it.
In a famous 19th century case, a British jurist wrote that a lawyer defending his client, quote, must not regard the alarm, the torments, the destruction which he may bring upon others. He must go on reckless of the consequences, though it should be his unhappy fate to involve his country in confusion, unquote. Now, in the case study you've just watched, the nation's fate happily was not at stake. But in recent real-life cases similar to ours, many Americans have expressed outrage at the sacrifice of the victim's rights by attorneys for the defense. Some of us who are not lawyers may question such behavior. Indeed, does our legal system force lawyers to step outside the norms of ethical conduct? Or, as lawyers James Neal and Jack Lipman maintain, is such single-minded zealousness the only way a defendant's rights can be protected? Next week, we explore the conflict between private interest and public trust. Our subject is ethics in government. Try to join us.
This has been a production of Columbia University Seminars on Media and Society in association with WNET, New York. Columbia University Seminars on Media and Society is solely responsible for the content of this program. With additional support from Equicor Equitable HCA Corporation, the Good Listening Employee Benefits Company.
Annenberg Media. For information about this and other Annenberg Media programs, call 1-800-LEARNER and visit us at www.learner.org.